Hi, I'm Ralph Albert Thomas, CEO of the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and I've been a CPA since August of 1982. I'm one of thousands of Black professionals who have found success in work and life thanks to this coveted credential of being a CPA. But that success is in large part thanks to those who paved the way for Black accountants to overcome or to become CPAs. Today, I have the honor and privilege of uh, being joined by one of those early trailblazers, Dr. Johnnie Clark. Dr. Clark, welcome and thank you so very much for providing this opportunity for us to chat with you. And Dr. Clark, as I have it in the uh, book that was published by Teresa Hannon, A White Collar Profession, was the 92nd person of color to become a CPA. So, Dr. Clark, let's just have a good conversation. As you know, 2021 marks the 100th anniversary of John W. Cromwell's landmark achievement of becoming the very first Black CPA. And that's some years ago and later. Yeah, you earned your license. And I believe, what state was that, Dr. Clark?
Georgia.
Georgia, okay. And what thoughts come to mind when you reflect on those accomplishments now?
Well, I would have been probably in the 50s or 60s. I usually think about that if I had not been chased around Georgia for 2 years after I passed the exam.
Yeah, because I believe you passed the exam in 1962, and then it wasn't until 1964 that you got your license and certificate. Yeah. So what was the reason for the gap, Dr. Clark?
Well, the last sitting, I had a little run-in with the chairman at that time. Uh, there were three of us, three blacks sitting at that particular session. And there was a rule that you should never sit next to or with someone with whom you worked or studied. And so we were sort of spread out there in the Capitol at the time. And the chairman came over and said to me, he didn't speak to the two guys with whom I was, and said, would you mind sitting in the rear? Well, we had gotten there early and gotten what we considered decent seats in order to avoid all the smoking because it was at that time a smoking den, but and it was thick, and we were trying to avoid some of that. And so we were sitting near the front, so you could see from the gallery who was down front. And at that time, I guess blacks were not expected to be sitting down front.
Okay.
And he asked if we would sit under the gallery in the back. And if someone had asked me, how would you respond? I never would have said I would respond as I did. It just irked me so because everyone is tense and ready to go for the exam and not to be bothered with something like seating arrangements. And I said to him, "Why didn't you write us a letter and tell us you wanted us to sit in the rear?" And then we could have let the society in New York know that seating was being managed differently than had been expected. And so after that, that was my last part of the exam. That was the problems or practice part of the exam. And the guys always said that you never came back because that upset you, so you decided you were going to pass that time. And of course I did. And the chairman decided that he was going to make sure that they held on to that certificate as long as they could. So he chased me around Atlanta to make sure I was putting in time with some other CPAs, and there were two black CPAs that I was very close to. J.B. Blayton and Lars Ed Hale. And so that was not a problem. But he said since I was teaching and I was working otherwise, I wasn't putting in the amount of time. And so he held it up. And then finally, there was another young man that I knew from North Georgia. And I called him one day and said to him, look, I've been waiting quite some time to get my certificate. I would appreciate, your help. And so he says, well, let's talk to the insurance commissioner. And we did. And he said, I'll call you. And he called and said, come down and get your certificate. I went down, raised my hand, and, swore that I would adhere to the rules that they had. And they gave me my certificate. Unlike the certificates that were handed out at a luncheon to all of the other members who had passed. And that was the delay of 2 years. So I would have been much earlier listed, at least in that listing of 100.
So, Dr. Clark, how did that make you feel that you had to wait that long?
I really wanted to hit him, but that would have been real ugly, and I probably would have been taken out at that time. And that's how I felt. I really wanted to punch him because we were all ready to deal with the exam, and that was my last part. The practice part, and I didn't want to be bothered with that. But he was from Ohio, and I think he was trying to make himself look good among the Georgians, or so he thought. And one of my persons from Augusta, where I grew up, said to me, he says, Johnny, you should have passed that exam when I was a chair. He says, old Charlie is going to give you hell. And old Charlie tried to.
Well, we're certainly glad that you passed that exam. That's for sure. So, Dr. Clark, take us back to that time when you were growing up, and just kind of share with us your experience as a young person growing up in the South, and then after that, I want to really focus on what inspired you to pursue accounting. So, tell us a little bit about your early childhood, if you will.
I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. Augusta was rigidly segregated during the time I grew up. You were always last in line, and if whites of any description came up while you were there to get service, you had to wait until they were served before they got to you. That was hard to take, really. I think sometimes, even today, I feel that kind of feeling. It was just terrible, really. I mean, any store that you went into, you always had to wait until everybody else was served. Then you were served. And there were 7 of us. And as children, I had 6 siblings, and we all, I guess, had similar experiences. On the bus, you were always at the back, and you were not even given time to get to the back. Often I would accompany my grandmother to the clinic at the Augusta University Hospital. And you would hope that the bus driver would give her time to get to the back after she had put her money into them. But as soon as she got on, he ran the bus as fast as he could, and she was about to fall. And one day she sat in the seat right next to him because otherwise she would have been on the floor. And he said, Annie, you can't sit there. And of course, the blacks who were in the back said, come on, we'll help you, get to the back. And I was saying, Granny, let's move now. Let's get to the back, because I was really frightened then, because the bus driver was just so ugly at that time. And finally we got to the back and, sat down. And of course, the unfortunate thing is that Granny was not a mild-mannered individual. And I knew that we would really have a battle on that bus if he had, gotten up to pick her up or to even push her back. And that kind of experience was common. I mean, it wasn't one that was rare. That's the thing. It was, you had to get to the back. And if you were outside trying to get into the back door and then later, paid, that was always an issue. So I think of that in terms of really how, as a child or as children, we grew up, and of course, walking just on the pavement. In other words, you would have to step off the curb, if whites were coming, and that was just simply not the way for kids to grow up.
So let's talk about what inspired you to pursue accounting.
That came about really after I got to college. And of course, I was scheduled to go to Wilberforce in Ohio, being a member of the AME Church. And at that time, Wilberforce was the crown in education for our church. And the summer that I would have been thinking of going, getting ready, getting packed to go, Wilberforce lost its accreditation. And I finally ended up, that was in 1947, ended up at Morris Brown in Atlanta. Uh, and the difference is that I had no scholarship, and I needed a job, and I needed some additional money because I had been granted a scholarship to Wilberforce, and would have had it for 4 years if I maintained the B average. So that was really a setback, which meant that I worked, had a job at the school, and carrying a full load the entire time I attended college there.
What barriers did you have to overcome, other than the issue about you were going to go to Wilberforce? But what other barriers did you encounter while you were in school?
Well, financial, obviously. I dropped out for a semester, went to New York and worked as a carekeeper for a young lady, and then went back after I saved enough money to pay my tuition. Uh, that was, I guess, the strongest factor in terms of things that I had to, really deal with, because at that time campuses were very strict. You didn't go out and stay all night as they do now. You had to be across the bridge by 6 o'clock. You couldn't wear pajamas to breakfast or anything of that sort. Many things are different now, so things have really changed over the years. I had several jobs while I was in college at Morris Brown. First was in the library, and that was a bonus for me because it simply meant when I was not really working with a student, I had the opportunity to study, and I was surrounded by the books that were there. So that was a bonus, a real bonus. And then subsequently, I ended up in the president's office as an assistant, and then finally ended up managing his office. That was during the time of Dr. John Lewis, who was president of Morris Brown at the time I graduated.
So what drove you to accounting?
When I dropped out for a semester, I got to know the neighbor on Sharon Street in Atlanta by the name of Dr. Larzette Hale. She was head of the business division at Clark College at the time. And of course, we talked and interacted, and she suggested that I think about, asked me, what did I know about accounting? I didn't know very much about it. I mean, I was a fairly decent math student in high school and that sort of thing, but hadn't thought about it in terms of a career plan. And she said, well, why don't you think in terms of taking, it was at that time called bookkeeping, it wasn't accounting, taking a bookkeeping course this coming semester and see how you like it. She was head of the business division at Clark. And so I did. I took a course from Sam Southern at Morris Brown in bookkeeping and accounting. I mean, he referred to it in that manner, and found that I did very well in there. Made top grades, so on, and found it interesting. And then I said, well, maybe this is the area I should go. And I always remember when my mother said, remember to major in an area that is going to give you a decent livelihood, so you can take care of yourself and don't have to depend on anyone to assist you with that. And I had that in mind. And as I continued to take accounting courses, after I got out of that elementary course, I took the intermediate course. And that's the course that sort of separates the boys from the girls, so to speak.
So Lizette Hale really, really inspired you to pursue accounting. She's according to the first 100 African American CPAs, she was number 28 to have gotten her exam. So that's interesting. And I guess I understand she just recently passed away, I think.
Yes.
Another trailblazer out there.
She was one of the first to get the doctorate and also to get the CPA.
What was your first job out of college once you graduated?
Well, I didn't quite get out. I had worked for Dr. Lewis as a student, and he said to me he wanted to get a more of a tour person in there to run his office because this young woman had an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. But she was not able to deal with just managing an office, typing, stenography, and that sort of thing. And I knew those areas, and also knew how to operate a PBX switchboard, and taught all the other assistants and faculty members too, who needed to know something about it. So at any rate, I had finished and was ready to go to New York to work for the United Negro College Fund and to attend New York University to work on my master's and my MBA. Because at that time, Georgia would allow you to receive student aid and go any other school in the country other than the University of Georgia in order to not go to the University of Georgia. And so I applied for state aid and, received it and went to New York University for the master's. And but on my way, Dr. Lewis called me. I was in Augusta at that time and said, Miss Lee, come quickly. My office is in a mess. And I said, well, Dr. Lewis, you told me that, you wanted a more mature woman in there. And so, I'm planning to start on my MBA. And he says, well, no, you're going to have to come and run my office for a while longer. You're just going to have to, because it's in a mess and I can't get anything done. And so I ended up coming back to Atlanta to assist him. And I worked there for another year. And then I told him that I was really going to go back to New York and finish my degree there, and did so.
So, how did you find? What was your experience like in New York, coming from Georgia and into what they call the Big Apple?
It was quite different then. New York University itself was different for me because HBCU schools basically have faculty who are committed to their students. But certainly at that time, that was the case. And they wanted to see you do well. And it didn't matter whether you were in their class or not. If they could assist you, they would. That was not so at New York University. There were one or two people that I was able to establish a relationship with that, assisted me. But by and large, that was not the case. If you were not in the class of that person or professor, then they didn't want to have much to do with you or anything to say to you, and were not helpful. Let me put it that way, not helpful. And so New York was a very different place. Now I loved the United Negro College Fund. Dr. Trent was head of the United Negro College Fund at that time, and had originally, been from the South, and so he knew all about the HBCU schools, had attended one and that kind of thing, and was raising money. He was head of that organization at that time for the members of the United Negro College Fund. And so there I worked, as a stenographer and typist or secretary, as the case may be, and learned a lot in that experience as I attended classes mostly in the evening. Because at that time, that was the way the MBA classes were scheduled at New York University, down in the Wall Street area.
So when did you get the I guess itch, if you will, to sit for the CPA exam?
Well, if you want to, be the top in the area in which you are studying, and you hope to work, then you certainly want to go for the top. And Larzette was already then a CPA, and and I admired her and was really just impressed by her as a woman, and then head of the division of business, and she still did accounting work for those who used her services. And of course, J.B. Blayton, another number 4, I think, on the list there. Yeah, encouraged us. He was, the father of accounting as far as we were concerned, and had established himself there. And of course, he had gone to Chicago in order to get his experience and recommend that.
How was your experience in sitting for the exam?
We finally ended up sitting right down front. I mean, we didn't move because at that time I was, how are we going to handle this now? Well, we're going to walk out, or we're going to, hang in here. And so, see, he didn't said nothing to the guys. I had explained to him what that he wanted us to do, and I had already said no, we will not do that.
Now, how long did it take you to ultimately pass the CPA exam, the entire exam?
It was several years, because you had to pass in the beginning 2 at the same time in order to hold credit, and then you could do. And I always passed business law. I passed that my first time, my second time, every time I have took it. But practice was because I didn't have that wide experience in different kinds of businesses. And that took me longer.
I share your pain in that as well, because that was kind of my pathway as well. Practice was it for me, and I was towards the end, because you lose a part and whatnot. So if you wait too long, but I finally got through. But I was so happy when I passed. So when you passed, how did you feel?
Well, I felt well, I've accomplished this. I mean, it was not I guess, an unexpected thing. I expected to pass it because I had put in the time, I had studied. The problem for us as Black CPAs at that time is that you only had mom and pop businesses. You didn't have, intricate and large businesses to get an opportunity to study and work in, and to learn how things were done there. So it made a big difference, a big difference. So I just felt that, that's one more step accomplished, you see. And then at that time, I also thought that I might be able to get a job in the area that I had studied for. And so I started looking around in New York. But when they saw my face and my skirt, they thought that, well, we don't have a place for you. The only job that was offered me during that time was by a small firm called Miriam Cass, I believe that was the way it was. And they offered me a job as a bookkeeper. And that's what they offered me. And at that time I had, passed the CPA exam. I said, oh, well, So I came back to Atlanta, worked part-time for the president, and began to teach. Taught for sometime in the evening school, because Morris Brown provided courses in the evening for teachers, particularly who worked during the day. And there I worked for several years. And when there was an opening full time, then I took it. And that became for me, I think, the most important experience really of my life. That is dealing with our students. And during the time I worked at Morris Brown and Atlanta University, and during that period, I'm sure there were over 100 CPAs that came out of that experience.
Outstanding. Now, what was your first opportunity to work for an accounting firm?
I never worked for an accounting firm
Okay.
other than my own.
Okay.
I had an accounting firm, and small businesses on the side trying to help them. But once they got to a point where they were uh, doing well, then I lost them to the larger firms. And I think that has typically been the experience of single proprietor black accounting firms.
Now you decided to go beyond the CPA credential and get a PhD. And so, could you share with us your experience going through your PhD?
Well, my experience as a CPA getting the doctorate was very different in the sense that I sort of looked at the doctorate as a union card, really. I looked at it as the opportunity to move up in the academic realm and earn a bit more money. At the time I was teaching, there was a very definite difference in the pay between men and women, as is still, in terms of what you got, whether you were doing the same thing or not. You could do identical courses, get the same kinds of ratings and so on, but the man would get more than you. And, I finally left Atlanta University, which was the last HBCU that I taught at, as a result of that. Because it was just not fair. It was time for them to, pay at least the same thing for the same work. And
So, throughout your career, who besides your faculty member at Lizette Hale inspired you to continue on? Because I can imagine um, back in the day, it was tough sledding for one anyone of color, but most importantly, a female of color trying to succeed in the business world. So, who kept you going? What kept you inspired to really fight the battle of making your way in your chosen profession?
well, I guess my experience with my mother, Larzette, and J.B. Bladen. Those three people, I would say, were the important inspirers for me. Uh, my mother, mainly because she always told me I was as good as any person on this earth, that I could do anything that I made up my mind to, and I believed her.
So true. I went through that experience too with my mom and my dad, and neither one of them had the opportunity to do a college degree. My dad was actually only went through the eighth grade, and it was amazing. Their push on my siblings and I that education was important, and you needed to do that, and they just stressed that each and every day that we were living in their house that was important. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah, well, my father had a very different attitude toward, particularly the girls. He felt that if you got a good high school education, then that was, great, and that was probably enough. Then you could, you know, get a job as a clerk, secretary, or something of that sort. You find a good man and get married and have a family. That was his attitude. It was my mother who insisted on education for us.
Okay.
It was my mother. Uh-huh. Because she came from, well, they came from different families. I mean, different type families. My father came from really a farm family, and my mother came from a family that had been very involved in the church, and particularly the AME church, which had always been for education.
You've had a distinguished career, and I'm so, as I said earlier, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to chat with you. As you look back over your career, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the experiences that I had with my students, and hopefully the fact that they came my way, that made a difference in terms of their lives and things that they chose to do, uh, and the work path that they took. Not all of them became accountants, although that's what one of the students told my son. He says, "Oh, that lady, is that your mother?" He said, "Oh, she wanted everybody else to be a CPA." And he says, "I just wanted a little bit. I didn't want that much." And so my son Charles, he said he laughed. He said that was so funny. But anyway, he said that he thought that was a real true expression of probably my attitude. But my attitude is that you should work hard to reach your potential, whatever that is, and you should really try to do good in this life. And that has sort of been my motto. Just dealing with students, and I've had students who liked me, and I've had students who disliked me. As a matter of fact, one of the first students that was hired after the big firms started recruiting on campus at Atlanta University um, said to me, he says, the personnel director of this company, this big company, uh, called me and said, "I hired one of your students." And I said, "Oh." And this student he was an undergraduate at Morehouse and had been a student in an accounting course with me. And we had battled from the day he met me because his attitude, that is the personnel director, the head personnel director out of Chicago, came to, normally they would not come, they would send someone else, but they wanted the top black. And I said to him, if you don't take the top black at the other schools that you recruit at, then don't come here, looking for the top. You will take the student based upon the credentials that you, use for the others. And for some reason, he didn't have that in mind when he came to Atlanta University. Did not want to interview young women at all. He said they were always a problem wherever they were in the offices and so on. And at that time, we were living through that change when young women began to come into the MBA program. And the building that we were in at the time, which was interesting, was not built for women. And they had one small bathroom in there, and everything else was for men. Mm-hmm. And they had to do something about that because soon we had more women than we had men in the business school. And so I had to explain to him, look, if you're coming here to recruit, let's be serious. we want all of our students to have the same opportunity. And if the women are doing better, then they should be provided better jobs and bring them aboard. And so we had that fight. Eventually, he saw the light and began to act. And that company was really one of the major supporters that I had from the outside during my career.
So if you've had a lot of firsts in your life, I believe the first Black to graduate from the University of Georgia or their MBA program, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was, but I never thought about it. And because when I went to Georgia, I went to Georgia because Georgia State of all schools wouldn't let me in. Uh, as a matter of fact, a guy who sat on the selection committee told me he never saw my application. And of course, which meant that, that at that time they did not, and all these people were in the Georgia Society and laughing in my face every time I went to a meeting, that kind of thing, Uh-huh. And that was an interesting experience, trying to interact in the organizations.
On that point, how did that make you feel when you were part of the Georgia Society, but yet when you wanted to go back to get your graduate degree, or they almost like turned their back on you?
Well, the Georgia Society was really made up of the accountants who worked at the big eight firms for the most part. And I had a good relationship with most of those firms, at least developed over time, and was able to get support from them when I became dean of the business school at Atlanta University, because we had no money. And I asked one of them if he would, host a luncheon and let me make my spiel on behalf of the business program. And we had provided students to various ones of them, and so they knew what kind of student we had. And we had the luncheon, and they were responsive. They asked me, why are you asking us first to support you? And I told them, well, look, you know me, I know you, and we've dealt with each other for some time now. You've had our students aboard, and I feel that this is as much for you as it is for me, in a sense. And they gave me during that period about $100,000. The Big Eight did. And I never would have been able to do what I did because we were trying to get to be a member of the AACSB, which requires, well, what all that is involved. And I needed books in the library. I needed faculty support for research. I needed paint in the building. I mean, I just needed basic things. And,
Right.
And they came. I told them when I went in, I said, I am looking at a narrow one and it's going to close quickly if I don't get some support. And, I'm asking you to give me that assistance, and they did, and I will be eternally grateful to the Big Eight in Atlanta at that time because they did come forward, and another person who came forward at that time to assist me was Herman Russell, because he was a member of my church, and I had asked him if he would paint the building. He says, well, how much money do you have? And I said, all that I had, I have allocated, and I don't have any anymore. And so, he said, well, you gotta have some money. So anyway, he agreed to paint the building. Building hadn't been painted since it had been built. So that was an interesting experience. And so we were able to get into this AACSB, even though it smelled of fresh paint when the committee came. Yes.
Well, Dr. Clark, you have certainly seen a lot. And one of the things that we still see here is that the number of African Americans in the accounting profession is not where it should be. Um, there was an initiative started by the AICPA in 1968. But really, when you look at the data today, the needle hasn't really moved that much. What, in your opinion, needs to be done to move that needle forward?
Well, a number of things need to be done. I always told my students, when you go into these firms, pay attention uh, to how the people who came with you, who went in with you, are treated, on what they're doing and what you're doing. I mean, particularly if you are credentialed when you go in. And many of ours were, because basically the CPA exam was a professorial exam. And I said, it's best for you to pass this exam while you're in school and while you're studying, and rather than when you go in doing grunt work, because the company is not going to be concerned about whether or not you get your credential. You have to be concerned about that. And I think so many of our students end up on nonprofit kinds of jobs. They don't get the exposure when they go into these firms. I spent, I guess about a year with Arthur Anderson, and got a chance to just see how things happened there in the company in terms of how people flowed through, how people got the information they needed that may not have been shared with everybody, or be shared with all those who fell into a certain category. And if you're excluding blacks from categories that you have, or you're keeping them in a category so that you can treat them differently and not give them the top exposure that they should get in terms of profit-making businesses and learning about a particular company in depth, then you're going to have problems, and people are not going to be able to do very well there. And so I urge young people to get that exam out of the way really before you go to work, if you can. That's the best thing to do, because that 2-year period will pass quickly. I had a young man who had gone to one of the HBCU schools and had lost all of his credit. He had passed, I think, and then he had a break, and I gave him some study material that had been from one of the companies. I don't even remember which one now, and got a plan for him so that he could put in at least 3 hours every day prior to, I guess about prior 6 months at least, hopefully 9 months prior to that exam that he was going to sit for. And he ended up becoming a CPA, and then later a dean at one of the schools in North Carolina in the business program there. But you have to put in the time, prepare yourself, and once you are prepared, you need to pay attention to what's going on in that company. Some companies are going to treat you fairly, some are not, and some are just as racist as they can be, and you have to be aware of that. And if you find yourself in that kind of environment, leave, move somewhere else if you can. And sometimes you can't do that. I mean, you gotta work, particularly, you gotta work, and that makes a difference. And of course, the companies themselves. I've always had a problem really with the way the AICP handled that. I mean, even though it was during that time when they set up the minority support program. In the beginning, it was for HBCU schools, basically black students. Then it became Hispanic. Then it became everybody. I mean, it just kept, so that it was spread out so that ultimately, blacks were eliminated for the most part. For the most part.
So now that it's been 100 years since the first Black CPA, what's your vision for Black CPAs over the next 100 years?
That's an interesting question. I think probably less so in terms of areas of interest. It seems to me so many of them now are moving away from, say, the nuts and bolts of accounting. Uh, they're moving into advisory capacities and that sort of thing, as opposed to, and I think to the extent that the talents that you have as a CPA can be used in other areas, modified, not just looking at numbers themselves. I think we probably going to have to do more in terms of our own training as CPAs, in terms of really what we can do with numerical data. That is, rather than saying that we get a statement from the AICPA saying this is the way certain things should look, and we're going to do it this way, and that's it. Uh, in order to deal with the changing technology, you see, because just about anybody now can get apps and use them and turn out programs. Just stick the numbers in, that, and many think that's what we'll be doing, in the future.
Well, Dr. Clark, what can we do? And I say we, folks like myself and others that are already in the profession, what can we do to inspire more Blacks to get engaged in the accounting profession?
Well, we can have, I guess, pod groups. I think about how we study it. There were about 5 or 6 of us who would get together and perhaps every Saturday or Sunday and work with J.B. Blayton. And at that time, you don't find much of that, now. Of course, most of these firms have their own, study plans in house. You don't really even have to pay for a course now. When I came along, you had to sign up and make plans to attend sessions so that you could learn about various topics and so on. Most of those topics now are presented in house for the bigger firms. And the other side of it is, it seems that it takes us a long time to develop a large firm of any kind. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a medical firm. As a matter of fact, in the city of Atlanta, I think I can point to about 2 partnerships that have existed over, say, 20-year period with Black doctors. They just don't seem to, one is jealous of the other, or they don't seem to be able to just mesh their talents and, bring together what's best for the organization. That's a continuing problem. I would like to see more of that, because, as I said, once you get a certain size, many of the clients we have will then move, you see, to PwC or whatever, rather than staying with us. Yeah. And of course, that's necessary in some cases, just as with the schools. As I was saying to one of the presidents, you can't have John Doe prepare your statements, and you think that one of these big firms will accept that as acceptable. You see, I mean, they want to see an Arthur Anderson or Deloitte rather than John Doe. I mean, that's just the way it is. And until we can get to that, point of size and areas of expertise, that just don't follow the simplest plan, then I think maybe we would be able to attract more. And then we've got to get our own people to trust in us. I mean, really, we've got to get our own people. You see, when I think about how we have really existed in this country, I mean, the legacy of slavery yeah, has a long reach. Yeah, During that period, we were taught not to trust, to tell on other folks, and that kind of thing. Many of us sort of have that sort of like an ingrained kind of thing, and it doesn't work well for us in terms of moving ahead.
Well, Dr. Clark, we've had it's been a very interesting conversation with you, and I certainly any final thoughts that you want to leave us with in terms of what can happen to inspire more folks of color to be in the accounting profession, or just final thoughts for you as you look out over the horizon of where you hope things will ultimately be down the road.
You always hope that things will open up, but things don't open up by themselves. In so many instances, you have to sort of pry them open. I mean, really. Really. And we have to, I guess, find more pliers, and we have to encourage our young people, to reach their potential. And many don't, simply because they find a way to just manage in a mediocre sense, and they move right along with that, and they don't reach their potential. And I think that's the focus, I guess, I'd like to see, where the young people that we come in contact with and are trying to urge to come into the profession, that they reach their potential, and that they put the time in that they need to in order to reach that potential, and that nobody's going to do it for them but themselves, and they have to get out there and do it. But then once you reach a certain level, then you just simply have to have an environment in which you can move ahead, and sometimes you have to move from one environment to another. I have had that experience myself when I had to simply say to the president, "You take this job and shove it." I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do.
Well, Dr. Clark, thank you so very much. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have sat down with you and had this conversation, and to just thank you for all that you've done over the years to inspire students, to help them along in their careers and everything. And I'm just so thankful for folks like yourself, because I really believe if there weren't folks like you, I probably wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today, heading up the New Jersey Society of CPAs. And then I think in terms of all of your other students who are probably, I think, have had successful careers and whatnot. Just thank you so very much for all that you have done and contributed. And it's been a real pleasure to talk with you. And this will be something that I will always remember in my career in the profession, having had the opportunity to chat with you and hear your experiences and all that you have done, and just fabulous, Dr. Clark. So thank you so very much for being with me today and participating in this program that we're putting together around the 100th anniversary of the first Black CPA. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.